Well, what a fun day this will be on the public square. I'm Wayne Shepherd here with Dave Zanotti, and the team is here. Rob Walgate, Alan C. Duncan, our producer, and a couple of very special guests join us today for what I think is going to be a very enlightening conversation, Dave.
Thanks, Wayne. We've got everybody here. It's kind of interesting. The studio that we work out of has got a surrounding set of pieces of art, and they're on every wall. In fact, we're missing two. We have two more to get going here. And so we are starting a second row of pictures that surround the studio. And those are artistic renderings of our work at the Christmas in America productions, which started off in 2011. And I just stumbled on a video from that 2011 show, and it was really interesting with Phil Kagi. It was quite remarkable. Wayne, we're in the business of media. That's what we do. Now, of course, we do a lot of other things. People understand the American Mission Center here to be the headquarters of a bunch of American missionaries that go out under the auspices of the American Policy Roundtable. And the Public Square Media Network is a part of all that. So I don't want to use the word content creation. I use the word content production. The reason I don't use creation, like people say, well, DZ, you are the creator of the Public Square Media Network. No, I'm the founder of it. The reason I've stopped using the word creator, or like we got content creation, is because I was listening to a John Lennox lecture the other day. The professor from Oxford, our good friend who's been on TPS, and a very good friend, Wayne, that you introduced us to. He's a good friend of you as well. And he made the comment of something that I had known and forgotten, which is that there's only two times, and Jeff, you can shake your head on this. There's two times in Hebrew, in the Old Testament, that the word creator is used, the word creation, creator, and it is exclusively speaking of God.
Always.
Got it.
Bara is always of God.
Bara is always of God. Jeff's off mic right now. He'll be on mic shortly, but we'll repeat for him.
We have more people in the studio than we have mics today.
We have more. Yeah, that's hard to do. We got a lot of mics. All right. So the point is that we're not creating anything. We are reflecting. We are reflecting. But what we're trying to do is to influence culture at every possible level. And if you study the history of the church, Alan, this is something that I think you'll probably get into. You study the history of the church, it wasn't very long before the church started to use the arts to tell the story of Jesus. We were watching a National Geographic special on discovered artifacts of the Bible. It was one of those great stories of archaeology and all. And recently, just a few years ago, there was a discovery, and I think it was the Museum of the Bible that was participating in this and that also helped produce this piece, that it may have been their piece exclusively now that I think about it, but there was a mosaic found in Israel. Did you see that, Alan? Isn't that a cool
I've seen
story?
reports about that. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
This amazing mosaic that was formed, telling the story from four different people's perspective of the death and resurrection of Jesus, and they discovered it. So it's like right there. It's for real. So it wasn't long before the church started to use the arts.
Right. I think that mosaic itself dates to around 230 AD.
Yeah, and that's something. And Jeff, it's like as big as this whole studio floor. It's big. Yeah, it's really cool.
The Megiddo mosaic, I think, is the one you're referring to, and it calls Jesus God specifically.
Yep.
You know, so that was early. That was very early, and I'm sure there's earlier stuff that's been destroyed. You know, that's just been lost to time. So that's one of the earliest ones that you've found so far.
Even an organization that, as it functioned in the Roman Empire, was illegal for the first 300 years, was busily using arts and expression of arts and music. In fact, I will tell you that one of the things that astounded me when the Lord found me and permitted me to have faith in Him, a saving faith in Him, when I became a Christian, was the music of Christianity. I'd never even considered it before. And it was astounding to me. In fact, Wayne, we just finished a concert a couple of nights ago with Ernie Haas and Signature Sound. And
I heard a report about that. Yeah,
there's all kinds of reports going on. I got caught on stage with four men mountains, like 6'3", 4, 5. I looked like an Oompa Loompa up there. It was.
I have the pictures. I took some pics. No, you look good. It was good
for a little guy.
It looked nice.
They're just very tall.
Yeah, yes. You just looked Italian, like me.
So we just finished the premiere. The video will be out soon of a new show that Ernie's doing, America, Land of Hopes and Dreams. That'll be out there on the road for the next year and a half, coming into the 4th of July of next year. So it's very exciting. And we were talking about the value of music, and particularly the wonder of harmony. That if you really think about where did music come from and what is the appeal to music, why does music exist? Martin Luther said that next to the Word of God, music is the most influential force in the human experience. And I would suggest that as beautiful as solo work is, there's nothing like harmony. Harmony somehow enables us to sing the same note from multiple perspectives. And that's fascinating. You just think about that's a whole apologetic, if you will, toward the fact that we are made in the image of God.
There's an early quote from about 112 A.D. Pliny the Younger, a Roman, was writing to Emperor Trajan, and he's talking about early Christians. He describes them, and he says they were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn and sing responsively a hymn to Christ as to a God.
Wow.
That's one of the earliest descriptions of a Christian by pagans looking at them.
And he just had that like up on his notes. He just, this is Alan. Did you see how fast he found that? He didn't know what we were going to talk about 5 minutes ago.
I know, but this also justifies the need for the quote board to come back, Alan, because that would be
Pliny the Younger.
Yes.
Alan C. Duncan.
Yeah. How did the Romans describe early Christians? They met on a fixed day, early, and they sang together to Christ
as God. Yeah. So we are in the media world, and that media world requires more than just talking. Now, there's a lot of people that talk and talk really well, but even some of the best communicators of the last 100 years have recognized that as media has expanded and now expanded to where just about anybody can have some artistic opportunities with all that's happening in the digital world, we want to be involved in producing more and more content that reaches people through their eyes, through their ears, through their hearts, through their minds. And so we've got a whole bunch of stuff going on we're going to talk about today, particularly as it relates to kids. And that's where Kids on the Square comes in. That's where Sarah and Jonah come in, the Jacksons, who are now full-time with us in regards to the production of Kids on the Square. So we want to talk about that. And you don't want to miss it because there's some very special things coming up.
All right. Well, let's get to know this couple right away. I think you should do the introduction officially, Dave.
Well, Sarah and Jonah Jackson live in Nashville, Tennessee. They are both, I immediately think of Dave Ramsey when I say this. They are both musical theater majors who graduated from Lipscomb University, fell in love and got married. And Sarah doesn't believe in stage romances and showmances. And so they had to do Into the Woods together, portraying the role of husband and wife, while Jonah was unable to pursue her in regards to dating her because they just wouldn't, that was just what Sarah wouldn't do. But in spite of the resistance, he prevailed. They were married. They have one child. They live in Nashville and have an extraordinary resume, each of them built up in the professional acting community. They have studied in London. They have studied on Broadway in New York. They have performed in almost all in fact, they performed in all the major theaters in Middle Tennessee and the Nashville area. They've performed in multiple states across the country. Now they're also writing and they are also directing. So incredibly qualified as a couple and as young parents. And they now head up Kids on the Square, which is a radio outreach. Or we call it radio because radio now means anything, which is a media outreach of the Public Square Media Network.
All right. You should write resumes, Dave. That's so well put.
I don't know, making it sound really good, Dave.
Yeah.
I was impressed, yeah.
I'll take it.
Yeah, wow. I've done a lot of things, I guess.
I need you to write one for me someday.
You guys should ask for a raise right now.
On air.
All right, Jonah, equal time here. Do you want to say anything in response to what Dr. Zanotti has said here?
No, I mean, I think that's a great way to just set it up is, that's a broad overview. I will say I did not originate in the world of musical theater, though. That is my lovely wife. I did not do musicals until I got to college, so that was not my major. I just happened to be a man, so ended up in musicals.
Well, you also started off on Reading Rainbow on
That is
PBS
true.
in Nashville. You're one of those kids who read a book.
I read my book.
Your book. He wrote a book and was on Reading Rainbow at what, the age of 4 or
Like
6?
five
yeah.
years kindergarten.
Wow.
I think we played that clip on one public school.
I
I
think
might have
so.
to try to play it
Well,
again.
this ties into what I was going to say. This seems to be a summer annual session with us to bring us in the summertime. So
Yeah.
for those super loyal listeners, you have met us before, and you
Yes.
probably have heard that Reading Rainbow clip again.
I am almost positive that they've played the clip.
Yeah, I remember sending that with vigor.
I'm Jonah Jackson, and the name of my story is called Joe the Dinosaur Stayed at the Beach. One sunny day, Joe the Dinosaur decided to go to the beach.
Yes.
Well, how do you guys? We're going to take a break in just a few seconds here, but get us just a little nugget of how you guys go about doing what you do with Kids on the Square. What is Kids on the Square? And then we'll dive into it more deeply.
Well, Kids on the Square is really, like already been said, a media outreach of the public square, but a way for conversation starters to happen at homes with our listeners who have children or grandparents, parents, anyone who really has a young ear or a young mind that they want to support in the big ideas we're bringing to the public square when it comes to the founding of our nation and true truth. How do we begin to dissect these big, important topics for all ages? So we hope that these programs that we're making for Kids on the Square is a launcher for greater and deeper conversations at home.
Yeah, that's well said. And Dave, as we go into a break now, boy, do we ever need this, huh? This is
Can't wait.
This is
I
essential.
can't wait to get back to segment 2. Hurry up.
Yeah, all right. We'll come back in a moment and we'll delve into what Kids on the Square is all about and how you can make good use of it in your home. Stay with us.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square.
Have you listened to the Kids on the Square episode, Dearest Friend, featuring John and Abigail Adams? Join us for discoveries,
My point exactly. So let me do you a favor and let you know that while your stabbing wit is a strength, it is a weapon that should be saved for other evenings.
I am sure I don't know what you mean. Father has always told us to speak only kindly.
adventures.
Whoa!
Oh, you are right.
Yes, I'm fine. But I beg your pardon. I didn't know anyone else was here.
That's quite all right.
And laughs.
We're about to get a history lesson from my very nerdy and nosy uncle.
Fine. I guess you can wait in this drive-through line, listen to my 80s classic rock, and not hear about the greatest colonial love story ever told.
Not the 80s rock playlist.
You know, I'm feeling a little more a cappella today. Oh, we're halfway there.
Fine. Tell us about the atoms.
Kids on the Square aims to bless, encourage, and educate the next generation of American children. So what are you waiting for? Grab a friend, share this episode with your family, and join us today at Kids on the Square.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the public square.
Back with you on the Public Square today as we have Sarah and Jonah Jackson with us to talk about Kids on the Square. You've heard us talk a little bit about this in the past, and if you've been with us at Christmas in America, you've had a taste of it as well. But we really want to learn as much as we can about this intentional, biblical, true truth kind of ministry to our kids, Dave. This is very important these days.
Well, and it's expanding dramatically. So much has happened over the last 2 years with Kids on the Square, and listeners have caught up with it over different pieces and parts. I mean, the radio programs are tremendous and reaching families across the country. The whole publication of Dr. Allen's story in regards to the front steps and what God is doing there. And Kids on the Square they've already published their first children's book. It's magnificent. I mean, it was a book that the Department of Education in Florida recommended as the book of the month for all the public schools in Florida. I mean, this is really exciting stuff. And in fact, I'll even go a step farther, because we don't have a fund solicitation or development component of the American Policy Roundtable. We don't have any staff that does development. Everything is voluntary.
You know what a friend of mine calls them? Gimme Jimmies, he calls them.
Right. Well, we don't got none of that. It just was one of that they received just last month. They received their first $1,000 check from a listener, unsolicited, to apply to the work of Kids on the Square, which just made my day, because I can remember the first time somebody handed us a check for APR. I can remember that and what it felt like to realize, wow, people really will support this. And I mean, you barely have to ask, because there's something going on here that is just energizing. And so we're trying to walk out that Great Commission through that great commandment to love our neighbors, we love ourselves.
And I'll say that gift, that first $1,000 gift, it came from a listener, but that listener is also a grandparent. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that did play into it and have something, because they've seen it with their children, but also they're like, wow, I know they care about the future for their grandchildren.
Yeah, and let's talk about the future, because when people think of a public policy organization, we are missionaries in the field of public policy to America. We get that. People always think of what you would think of as the end point, or if I could use an illustration, tip of the spear type thing, where the idea that there's a point at which you've got a point of inflection in which everybody's looking at this public policy thing. Maybe it's in front of the Supreme Court. Well, we've been there. Maybe it's in the White House. We've been there. Maybe it's at the state capitol. Been there. Maybe with a governor. Been there. Senators. Been there. Legislators. Been there. Ballot issues. Been there. Okay. All those points are important, but that's where people expect to see a public policy organization. What they don't see is if you don't have something on the other side where you're planting seeds and helping parents do the job that only parents can do and grandparents can do and loving relatives can do, to plant the seeds of righteousness and true truth to people, to help kids understand how all this stuff comes to be and why, then you're only going to have more and more and more moments where you're on the steps of the Supreme Court fighting for your life. You've got to do both and. And you say, well, that's fine. You guys, and people will say, well, you guys try to do too much. You just stick with that, stick with the point of the spear stuff. Well, here's the problem. If you want to go back and teach the true truth to kids, and you've got all this experience on how it actually works, it would just make sense to hire more people to download what you've got back into that youth culture, as opposed to say, well, let's just go, we know what's got to be said, so let's say it. Mm-hmm. So it just really came to a question of resources and people, and by God's grace, we sort of found these two. They're kind of standing at a bus stop in Nashville saying, we'll act for food. No.
This goes way beyond information to education, doesn't it?
It really does, and it's a flow.
Well, but here's what it's not, and this is something that Anna and I talked about a lot when we talked about the Front Steps book. Mm-hmm. There is an intent to teach, and you guys can speak to this as well, but there is an intent to teach. There's purpose and meaning behind this. It's not art for art's sake. Mm-hmm. But you're people who love the arts. Yeah. You're people who love the craft. It's not propaganda. You aren't policy hawks who just suddenly turned on microphones. Like, because as Dave described,
great illustration. I thought you were going to say policy wonks. You took it up another level. Policy hawks.
Yeah. I don't know. As Dave described your background, you're people who do love the form and the arts that you're working in. So I don't know. Could you talk about that a little bit? Like, how do you view that?
Well, what you just said is one of the biggest reasons why I am so personally motivated and invested in this work. Part of my research process is looking on so many different platforms, mainly online, but even when it comes down to our local library, I check out about 5 to 7 books based on one topic that we're interested in writing for Kids on the Square. Or I research hours and hours for each episode, and I compare and contrast, and I see what's out there. And so much of the content for kids that is out there artistically speaking, is dull,
lacking,
annoying, and loud, and really cheapens what we believe our children can intake. And I really believe that what art form you're putting in front of your kid from day one is going to influence them for the rest of their lives. So the fact that this team is so motivated and dedicated to not only educating this next generation, but putting forth content that has true meaning, true craftsmanship behind it means the world to me.
Well, it's a respecting of kids.
Yes.
You can feel that your team, when I listen to the broadcast, I can tell you guys enjoy what you do and respect kids as human beings.
Respecting their intelligence level, respecting the fact that they want to learn a new word and not just totally pandering every vocabulary word down to a certain grade level, right? Yeah. Striving and respecting their ability to learn more and to want to learn more.
And also, if you tell stories well, people want to listen to those stories. You can have a great story and tell it poorly and no one will care. But to tell good stories, important stories, true stories, and to tell them well with the level of craft and care that they deserve, that is what hooks people in, what hooks in the mind and the imagination is telling stories with care and intention.
And you're going to get the parents as well. There are things I listen to in the show like, oh, I didn't know that. You'll get parents. This is why. Yeah, exactly. It's a sneak attack.
I secretly laugh out loud a couple of times, and I'm like, "Well, am I laughing at my own joke, or was the delivery of this was just genuinely funny?"
That's why people like Bluey. A kid show that respects its audience. It's done well. It's crafted well. It's funny. It's told. The stories are well told. So I don't know. That's why.
Well, in the creation of it,
not fair.
That is one of Bluey's lines. Yes.
Oh, yes.
But in the creation of the episodes as well, you talk about, Sarah, you guys are creating them together, but also it does remind me of, and we make reference to this a lot, the Tom Hanks big moment. The adults in the room sometimes get lost in what they want and not relate to the kids. And we've seen the opposite of that is kids are gravitating towards it because it's geared toward them and things that they would want to hear or learn about, or developed in a way that they can appreciate, not what we as adults think they should receive.
Yeah. And I also think, going back to what you said about stories being crafted well, isn't that what Jesus did with the parables? Isn't that why he decided to teach in these parable lessons to hook and captivate his audience? But there's just a real beauty to that.
Storytelling, and the importance of it.
Yeah, and I know in creative work, it happens every day. I mean, you've got to come up with new stuff how do you generate all these ideas for what you do on Kids in the Square?
Well, Sarah is the mind behind all of these scripts. I will.
If anyone wants to write a script, they're totally welcome to. They're so welcome to write 30 pages of
dialogue,
of historical fiction. Yeah,
it's got about 250 years of history to start with. So there's a couple of
source to pull from.
A couple of stories there.
To be fair, though, it is a team effort in the sense of we really want this to be something that pairs well with what the public square is talking about. I'm still brainstorming on an episode for kids about taxation that we had on the public square a while ago. Or right now we're so beginning to focus on the Declaration.
Yeah. So who are you mentally imaging when you write these scripts? Who do you have in mind?
Well, thankfully, I'm blessed with amazing people in my life. I am also an educator as well. I do a lot of aftercare work. So I really believe that being around children helps me as a writer. I can really imagine and hear how different students of mine talk and speak. But then, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there always winds up to be a personal launching point for me where it's something in our own lives that we've experienced. For example, in this upcoming episode, my son was obsessed with this Shakespearean rubber duck. And he played in it. He played with this Shakespearean rubber duck for about 20 minutes one day.
Yeah.
Who isn't?
I don't even know what that means.
Like you know how the rubber ducks have all the different like shapes and all the different like outfit.
This one was the bard
like a
himself.
Shakespeare rubber duck.
Okay,
And
that was
so-
basically what I was imagining.
Yeah.
Right. And next thing I know, this duck is in the script for 3 pages, and it just flows
An important
very
plot
naturally.
point is the duck.
Yeah, a duck
The
becomes
duck has a name, I'm guessing?
Sir quacks a lot.
And he's classically trained, I'm sure.
Exactly.
The duck has spoken.
So there are many little gems like that are really stemming from a personal life that I do think makes it people are able to latch onto it and feel that connection still.
It's relatable.
Yes.
Let me
We all
add,
have those
Wayne,
things.
real quickly that the depth of experiences, both as parents, but also the fact that Sarah has been doing productions with kids for years now. That is, and substantive productions as well. She just got done producing and directing a performance of Mary Poppins in Nashville. And Jonah has been connected for several years with the Nashville Children's Theater, both in doing puppetry work there as well as performing and in directing. So they have I'm telling you, the resume I gave was way too small. They're deep here. They're deep in this field.
Sure. Yeah, and if you give it a chance, I bet the duck will quack you up, huh? All right, let's take a break, and
Somebody
we will come back.
had to say it.
We'll come back on the public square in a moment. If you join this madness late, you can always go back to the beginning by going online to YouTube, our smartphone app, The Public Square, or our website, thepublicsquare.com.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square.
All right, I told you it'd be fun today on the Public Square, and it has been so far, and some more fun ahead. I'm Wayne Shepherd here with Dave Zanotti. We've got the normal crew here. Alan C. Duncan's our producer. Rob Walgate is at the microphone, or was a moment ago, until we have our super sub stepping up to the microphone, and that's Melanie Elsey, who's going to join us now.
Tag team
Jeff
panel.
Sanders is in the room as well. Yeah. And our special guests, Sarah and Jonah Jackson, talking about kids on the square. So, Melanie, we want to make sure you didn't get shut out on the mic here, so you go ahead. You have a question?
It's such a fun conversation because it brings back memories of when my children were little. And, we have grandchildren now, so my children are all grown. I think they're older than Jonah and Sarah even. Just saying. I remember the Christopher Churchmouse books and the audio books.
Yeah.
Nothing compared to what Jonah and Sarah are doing. But what reminded me of some scripture principles of when Dave said earlier in the broadcast that, we're planting seeds. Well, scripture teaches us that you don't reap what you don't sow. You cannot reap if you do not sow. And when we're talking about the next generation moving forward, preserving principles and concepts that have to be learned intentionally, we have to sow that now in children's minds. We have parents of children whose lives weren't sown, who can't reap what was not sown. So this is a resource basically for families to learn, sometimes to learn together through historical fiction, but in a fun way to sow seeds so that we do have something to reap later.
It's interesting because we've talked about George Washington a lot on this broadcast, and because we have one of America's greatest scholars on Washington on our trustees, Dr. William B. Allen. Dr. Allen helped me understand a little bit better about the George Washington's will, which was written in Washington's own hand and is still visible at the county courthouse there in Virginia for you to be able to go in and see. And one of the things that General Washington was most concerned about is that American children would not have to travel back to Europe for higher education and to learn the fundamental principles of America, because he was afraid they would go to Europe and they would be taught the fundamental principles of the European models, including the French Revolution and other things, and that those were not compatible with what the founding generation had established, that we needed to have institutions established on the ground, and he said in the middle of the country. Well, it's kind of ironic because in the middle of the country, right at that point in time, was about Ohio. All right, and that was the western frontier.
That's right.
And he had surveyed this land. He had surveyed the land that we're sitting on right now. He had been here, all right, in his early years. And so that institute, in our minds, is the American Mission Center. Now, I'm not suggesting that we got a message from General Washington from beyond or that God told us this is it. But it's just ironic that he was onto this in his will and dedicated money so that someone would come along and do this kind of stuff because he knew how important it would be. And we had the opportunity to pick that up. And again, it was about educating young people so that they wouldn't be out-influenced by other ideas that didn't work.
And the landscape today for influence is crazy.
Yeah.
When you talk about screen time for kids and how much time they're on, they just spill into YouTube and all of these different venues. My granddaughter said, "Mom won't let me listen to YouTube without an adult present." And I'm like, well, good. She's 8.
Good. Well, 8. Okay, let's talk about that for a second because what I'd like to know is you all have started this adventure with online, long-form audio communications. You've started with the theater of the mind. You started with radio theater. Why didn't you just instantly jump to animation on YouTube?
Well, animation's expensive. I will say we've toyed around with it a little bit.
Oh, and I know you know how to do it too.
Where we've certainly begun to experiment, and I think that's something where we'd like to go down the road. For whatever relevant projects. But to start off with the theater of the mind and storytelling, just the way that hearing the words activates the imagination is so powerful, and what your own mind can come up with is going to be so much more rich and so much more vivid than anything that we could put a little cartoon up and show you. So I think that the opportunity for rich storytelling there and engaging the minds. I mean, you think about some of the other children's radio programs that have been around for forever. There's a reason that there are certain ones that last so long. It's because they capture imaginations through telling stories. I mean, that's the oldest form of communication that we have is, and storytelling is through the spoken word. That's how stories were passed down before we could even write. We were telling stories to each other. So I think that is such a core thing to us as human beings, as people, is the love of telling stories and of receiving those.
And even on a practical level, this is something that parents and grandparents can just put the audio on in the car if you're driving somewhere, and you can listen together. Yeah, you're a better answer, but this is just practical. Put it on in the car, and you're not going to be watching a movie or a video together. You're going to be listening together. That's a perfect format or template to do that.
I have grandchildren that are travel teams for baseball. You have there is car time built into lives in the elementary years, especially. And what a valuable resource. Instead of handing them a tablet or putting a tablet on the back of the seat for them to watch a movie for 2.5 hours, why not listen together as a family?
Then it's a shared experience.
Yes.
And you can talk about it. There's something to engage conversation.
Yes.
And you can't escape it.
Right.
You can't, it just.
There's also something too where the structure of what we're trying to do here is create in the stories a modern day problem and then relate it to a historical moment. So there's something that I really love. It's almost like the concept of Hamilton. Hamilton I love as well, the musical. They recast it in ways that we don't normally typically envision the founding fathers as. Yeah. There's something where, because we're radio strictly right now, those children listening could be any of these characters experiencing this. And I feel like that is really critical for making history come alive, is being able to really imagine yourself in someone else's shoes. And maybe one day we'd love to pursue more video work, definitely on the charts. But to start us off in this way, to make it so relatable instantly just through your ears and your imagination is really powerful.
Yeah, that's true. I want to go back to something Melanie brought up, and that's grandparents. I think we need to challenge grandparents. You know, we have some parents listening, no doubt, who are doing just a fantastic job at raising their kids. But I think back on raising kids, and you get so caught up in the busyness of it all, the nowness of raising kids, that you don't take the long view. And I think this is where grandparents can come in. And, you know, you have the advantage of taking the long view back on raising your children, and you project that on your grandchildren. This is where grandparents can step up. And maybe mom and dad aren't as aware of this opportunity and necessity as they should be, but grandparents can kind of help nudge that along. And I appreciate you bringing that up, Melanie.
I've always said, too, when you think about generational vision, that parents themselves, we have, as grandparents, it's easier to re-educate our kids as they are parents. But we don't raise our children to be 18 and independent. We raise them to be the parents of our grandchildren. So we can, even at the grandparent stage, even if it's so much as hindsight, you can step into a role where you're helping your children raise their children to be the parents of their grandchildren, and just keep that generational vision going in ways that, like, I love how Sarah has described this radio venture to be exciting, to be, you don't need the animation. I don't think you need the visual animation. I remember thinking, this is what Adventure in Odyssey looks like in my head, because I was only listening to it on the radio, and I had pictures on what Mr. Whitaker looked like, and and everyone's going to have their own visual interpretation in their mind of what the characters even look like based on what they sound like.
Theater of the mind. That's right. Yep, exactly. Well, we'll continue talking about Kids on the Square today on the Public Square. You stay with us.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
All right, let's pick up the conversation today on the Public Square, talking about Kids on the Square, one of the newer outreaches from the team here at the Public Square. And we have the creators, Sarah and Jonah Jackson, with us today. And Jeff, your banishment, your exile is over. Jeff Sanders has joined us at the table here from the corner of the room where he was relegated. He now has his own microphone.
But is about to unveil a surprise to everyone.
But I thought that was my timeout chair, because
I wanted to call it that.
Yes, the dunce cap. Now, when I was a child, I used to sit in my father's lap on Saturday mornings, and they even had cartoons on Sunday mornings. And together we would watch, and I can still hear my father's laugh, which was infectious. If he started laughing, then the whole room would start laughing. And we would watch the old Bugs Bunny, not the news junk that's out there. The stuff, the old Bugs Bunny and Tom and Jerry from the 1940s and 50s. And it really ended like about the time I was born in the early 60s. And it was the art. I didn't realize what I was watching at the time. The art was magnificent. They had shadows in there. It looked three-dimensional, and yet it was just painting. But folks, this is how I learned classical music, was from Bugs Bunny. Mm-hmm. The barber, the Bunny of Seville. Do you remember? Does anybody remember?
Exactly. Of course you're talking about.
Exactly what you're talking about.
What would you want with a rabbit? Can't you see that I'm much sweeter?
Okay.
It was, and so then I watched that with my sons. Yes, you've lost control, Dave.
Dunk, we're in real trouble.
He's auditioning for a future episode of Kids on the Square.
I love it.
I'll do the short with the puppet.
Here's my question, though. From the philosophical perspective, was Daffy Duck the first anti-hero in American cartoons?
I loved Daffy Duck.
He was dark. He was your stuffed character.
Because, yes, he was me. And also, Daffy Duck, you could understand him. You can't understand Donald Duck.
That's the point. See, Donald Duck was
what a stupid duck Donald Duck is. Daffy Duck was an intelligent, rational.
He was the anti-hero to combat Disney's Duck.
Okay,
I got it. Okay.
But there's another series of cartoons. So does anybody know the name Max Fleischer?
Sure.
Okay, Max Fleischer created the greatest animation ever. And then he was used in the original Superman cartoons in the 1940s and 50s, which was amazing. But then they took, sometime about the time I was born or before, they started taking Classics Illustrated and putting it to animation. I'd never heard of Ivanhoe before. I'd never heard of Gulliver's Travels, which the movie Gulliver's Travels, the animated version done by Max Fleischer, is still out there. You can watch it. It is so good. It's Spielberg good. But this is how I learned my classical literature. I didn't know anything about this stuff, and it's what hooked me as a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old. I want to know Natty Bumppo and the Leatherstocking Tales and The Last of the Mohicans because I saw it animated, and I got enough of the story that it whetted my appetite for the rest of my life. I'm still reading this stuff.
Well, and then comic books came into the picture, and you began to draw.
Yes. So, I started drawing at age 2.
He is the resident polymath, by the way.
When I was, no, I'm serious. I remember my earliest recollection of drawing is all my 2 sisters and my brother we were all on the den floor, and they were all drawing. Of course, my 2 sisters were true accomplished artists. They could sculpt, they could paint, they could do anything. And so I started drawing whatever I could alongside my brother, and he told me to stop, and he hated me. But anyway.
But let's not scratch that.
But
we digress.
I'm bothered by it.
But then I started collecting comic books, and the best comic books I could find, there were 2. My neighbor down the street had the original Classics Illustrated, and I have a few of those. And the artwork, the paintings were magnificent. But then also there's an old series that came out in the early 60s called Combat. And this is how I learned my World War II history. And I have about 6 or 7 of these collector's items. They would tell the true story of Midway, the true story of D-Day, the true story of the bombings over Germany and how we were defeated at first.
Can you bring these in and do it?
Oh, yeah.
We need to do an express on these.
I'll bring them next week.
Video episode.
Yeah, El Alamein, the whole, it's all in there in these comic books.
This guy goes on to receive multiple graduate degrees, to be a professor of history. He's fluent in multiple languages, as well as studied in a whole host of ancient languages.
Here goes the resume making again.
Yeah, and here's the thing. It begins with a guy watching cartoons.
Bugs Bunny started it all,
and
folks.
Comic books.
Just want you to know.
How see where the seeds were planted.
Yeah, but just think, when you listen to Kids on the Square, you get Shakespearean ducks, not just
right. Yeah, yes.
ducks
We've
with a
taken
speech
it up a notch. Now that I think about
dynamite.
Yes.
Ducks with dynamite.
Well, and this is something C.S. Lewis talked about in his writings. You can't look down your nose on art forms. Any art form has its use. You can do it well, and it can have its place and have its use. Like science fiction writing was sort of maligned in the academic circles when C.S. Lewis was coming up, and then he went on
As were children's stories.
Sure. And so, but he went on to write one of the greatest science fiction series and novels of all time.
Where would we be without the space trilogy? Where would we be without Narnia?
Yeah, you can't look down your nose on these things. Just do them with excellence and have truth behind them.
So and please don't dumb stuff down. I know y'all aren't doing this, but as a child, I hated cartoons that dumbed things down like I was too. That's why I love Captain Kangaroo when I was a child, because Captain Kangaroo believed, and this is in writing, in his own writings, Bob Keeshan said, I believed that children had impeccably good taste, and we wanted to always shoot a little notch higher than their age level to bring them up. And it was Captain Kangaroo and Magic Drawing Board who taught me how to teach. They never dumb things down.
Now, while we're going to create real controversy here, another hidden skill of the polymath here is that he is really excellent at graphic drawing in regards to comic book format. He has a book that's finished that I have in a special place that he's finished probably 10 years ago.
Yeah, 2013.
On Richard Allen.
Yep.
One of the most famous black pastors in the history of America in the colonial era, and how he was a total cultural phenomena in what he did for the founding of our country. And now that we're thinking about it, and Anna's not in the room, we can
Give her another job.
Anna the assignment of finding the right graphic arts design and print company. Kids on the Square should get that book
that would be so
published.
cool. That would be so
made
cool.
a special pilgrimage all the way to the grave of Richard Allen, and I got a special tour of their museum there at Mother Bethel Church in Philadelphia, which is the oldest piece of ground and the oldest building in America that has been continuously owned by Black Americans over 200 years. And that church was started in a blacksmith shop, which is why the AME denomination, their symbol is a cross over an anvil. It's quite a treat to go there, folks.
Well, I think we had the birth of an idea here, Dave.
Yeah, I do too. I don't know if we're ready for a break. I am. I'm like blown away right now. Though I would say this would be a great place to take up an offering, because these things do to get from the idea stage to the actual stage. Now, this book is actually in a point now where we could take it to a printer. It's already Jeff by hand has done the whole. It's outstanding. It's a beautiful work. But these things do cost money, and while we don't have a development company, we do find ourselves seated in a room where everybody in this room is a donor. And that's how it works. All of us came here as donors and volunteers, so we are genuinely all in this together. So if what we're talking about right now makes sense to you, you can always just send us a check. You can always go online and at aproundtable.org or thepublicsquare.com, make a safe, secure contribution. We could use all the help we can get, and you can also designate it to Kids on the Square.
The mission is so very important, which we're learning today, aren't we? Okay, we'll continue. We'll wrap up with our special guests, Jonah and Sarah Jackson, on the program here today as you stay with us. If you have to leave at this time, again, you can always listen to the full program now on YouTube, on the free smartphone app, The Public Square, and at thepublicsquare.com. Listen there if you like.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square.
Let's continue a few more minutes on the Public Square, talking about Kids on the Square. There's an aspect that we haven't delved into yet, Dave, that we really need to spend some time with, isn't there?
Well, the integration of content so that mom, dad, middle schoolers, preschoolers, everybody's kind of catching a piece of the vision that we feel like we're moving forward on. And integrating those products together is very exciting. It's the first time we've ever had that opportunity, and it really is thrilling. For example, we've got a very serious concern about getting the 4th of July right at the 250th anniversary, that we keep the main thing, that we're looking at the words and the meanings of the Declaration of Independence and not caught up in a bunch of nonsense. And so we've gone back and done the historical research, and I've had the incredible privilege once again of working with Dr. William B. Allen. And we located a speech actually 14 years ago by John Quincy Adams called An Oration, which was delivered in Newburyport, Massachusetts, in which the former president was invited to come to a town and give a lecture on why the 4th of July. It's a 4th of July address. And that happened a lot back then. Major figures would do July 4th addresses. So we found that speech 15 years ago, and we're it was 15 years ago. And we were stunned by the extraordinary vision that the 6th president of the United States, who had been out of office and now was a member of the United States Congress from Massachusetts, what he had to say about the founding of the country. So Dr. Allen and I began to work up a textbook on the speech. And now it's right on the verge of going to the printer. It is extraordinarily exciting. Now, I say it's a textbook only because you could teach a whole high school or college class off of this one book, off this one speech. It's so cool. And it's very, very exciting. Well, that's working its way across the whole spectrum of product line production with Kids on the Square.
Yes, and this is an interesting thing that we've been hitting on this episode is not dumbing down something. So taking an incredible speech like that and researching John Quincy Adams and trying to find ways to impact a young listener with that truth. And the truth about John Quincy Adams and his life, especially his young life, is remarkable, fascinating, and it's hard not to want to write another book about it.
He started, I mean, if you think about John Quincy Adams, the words of the Declaration of Independence were in his house before they were in Independence Hall.
Mm-hmm.
His dad was writing down the ideas along with would have been his uncle, with Sam. So Sam and John Adams had the Declaration of Independence long before Thomas Jefferson ever got a quill in his hand. All right, so this kid was there. He, at 9 years of age, he was standing watching the Battle of Bunker Hill with his mother. All right, this is remarkable. What would you say? Was it 14? He was 14 years old. He was ambassador. 17 years old. He was ambassador to Russia. All right, he worked in the administration.
Could we get him back? Could he?
Well, maybe some kids are growing up right now listening to Kids on the Square. Right. They're going to get there. So you all are working on programming on the life of John Quincy Adams.
The first episode about his young life is coming out, I believe, this month, the month of June.
Yes.
And it is focusing on his first transatlantic trip with his father. And I'm really, really excited about it. At 10.
At 10.
Yeah, at 10 was his first journey.
I think in our conversations with David McCullough, one of the first times we met, and we brought our John Adams books with us for have him to sign because we'd all had read the book. And, mine was duct taped together. So, please sign this. I think if he had enough time to write one more story about an American founder, I think he would have chosen John Quincy Adams. Because you think about the film of John Adams, and you're seeing this kid there with his dad. All right.
The series, yeah.
Oh, what an amazing the HBO piece. And here's this kid out there going around the world with his father and the wind and the storms and the pirates and the British and everything else.
Well, thinking about schools, what age would you say that should become mandatory curriculum for children to have to watch the Adams series? Maybe 8th grade, 9th grade would be when the kid, that'd be a great use of an hour a day of school for 2 weeks. Watch the series.
And before you do that, listen to Kids on the Square.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So John Quincy's going to be the highlight of a couple of programs, right?
Yes, well, it's funny to go back to that HBO series again. We actually rewatched it, and it helped writing so much easier. I read as well David McCullough's book as well, but something about just hearing the voices and the way in which they were speaking, I was like, oh, okay.
You could hear it now then imagine what other conversations might have happened that weren't, things that are necessarily featured in the episodes of the series, but you hear the way that they speak and the way that these thoughts are formulated and then, come across.
And as I say that, I realize that I need to go back and watch it with my 13-year-old and 16-year-old. Maybe we'll have to pause Jack Bauer for a bit and switch to
get off the reruns.
Do you know who's the Jack Bauer in that series? It's George Washington.
Yeah.
The minute he steps up to the plate,
this dude's the boss.
You're like, wow, no wonder it's not his series because he's just like Superman in the colonial era.
The show would be over.
The show would be over.
Well, and what is so exciting about this is to think about the story of John Adams, to think about his family, and to think about the fact that David McCullough actually spoke with us about the fact that he was concerned in producing that HBO piece that he would be very careful that the language, what you just said, he told us as the author and the oversight. He sat with Tom Hanks and said, we can't have these people using any slang from the 20th century.
Yeah.
They have to have their language right. And you know what else he said? We can't fix their teeth up.
Yeah.
Because, and he says, they have to be a little dirty because everybody was back then. There was soot here and dust there, and everything wasn't perfect. He said, but we can't dumb it down. We can't make it smell good. We can't make it pretty. It's got to be real. Mm-hmm. And that series has stood up a long time.
So how many episodes are you anticipating on Kids on the Square regarding John Quincy?
Well, we already had one on John Adams. John and Abigail Adams was our most recent episode, and I think that there might have been a promo for that in a previous break. That was our most recent, and then now we are in process of rolling out this series of John Quincy centric episodes.
I think currently we have 4 drafts on the table of 4 different stories regarding the Adams and John Quincy in some way.
Does it cover just his early life or his whole life?
Both. Yeah. His entire
Okay.
life. Because
Okay.
I really think, again, I think if we set up his early life, the listeners will want to know what happens next. And some of the key critical ways that the Lord was using him as a young boy for the immense work he was to do in his future, it's an amazing testament of God's provision and providence and grace and the true plan he had for that life.
He did something right to become the man he was, because moving from president back to the House, I mean, stepping down like that, just from a leadership standpoint, is just a remarkable
extraordinary,
story.
Wayne, and that's where the book Oration picks up and then goes through that period of time to the Oration and then goes to the end of his life all the way through the Amistad case before the United States Supreme Court, which was another major film that Spielberg did on Leigh Amistad. And the story is you know what? You can't make this stuff up. If you made it up, somebody would just accuse you of blatant fictioneering or whatever the word would be. This is real stuff. It really happened in a real life.
And it shouldn't be lost to history. It has lessons for us now.
It is our history. In fact, I can't tell you how exciting it was to read multiple speeches. And this guy could write. He could talk. He actually was a Harvard professor of rhetoric. So you did not want to get into it with John Quincy Adams, all right? It's just like, so he goes up to the Supreme Court, and the amount of content that he presented to the court in defense of these African slaves who had liberated themselves, all right, and were now fighting for the freedom to go back to Africa. This case, he spoke to the Supreme Court for over 8 hours. Won the case. He made an 8-hour presentation. Now you say, well, wait a minute. Today, at best, you only get 45 minutes, right? Well, this is because this case had original jurisdiction. The Supreme Court was the first court that heard the case because it was an international case regarding slavery and international waters. It's amazing. So I see, we can't stop. It just keeps going.
Well, unfortunately, we have to stop on the public square right now, but thank you for bringing this to us. Kids on the Square, a vital part of the mission of the American Policy Roundtable, Dave.
So they've got a spot now every summer, at least one show, at least one show on the big network.
All right. Book it. Yeah. All right. Thank you all very much. That's the whole team here at the Public Square today, and we appreciate everyone very much and appreciate you for listening. You can find out more about us and what we do at aproundtable.org and thepublicsquare.com. Thanks for listening. Oh, yeah, and don't forget, kidsonthesquare.com to learn more about what we've talked about here today. kidsonthesquare.com. Thanks for listening.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.